It's always a pleasure to be here. And as I said, next week we have Dr. Paul Hornby coming, and we're probably going to do the regular half-hour lecture, but we're going to try to get Paul up here as soon as we can. And he is very open to questions. And in some sense, I hope today to give you some, I guess, background information about chemistry in a sense such that we'll be ready to pick at his mind next week, because Paul is a brilliant man and knows all sorts of things about this plant. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a 1-2 combination of lectures. So, yeah, I guess the topic of research is fundamental for our collective understanding of cannabis. Unfortunately, as this cartoon illustrates, science and research has not had much impact upon public policy as of yet. There was no science presented when these laws came into effect in the early 1900s. And most of the science that has been done has been largely ignored by governments of the world. And it's very unfortunate, because if the science would have been considered in the first place, this plant wouldn't have been made illegal. There's no scientific justification for it. And ironically, now we're in a position where we need to prove with science and research the benefits of cannabis and the harms of prohibition, when that standard has never been held to the other side. And the conversation can be frustrating at times, because I'm just going to go over a research project and topic one after the other, and like I say, there's no scientific basis for prohibition. But it is a fascinating subject to study, to be sure, and has been studied. This plant and its effect on society, I would argue, far more than any other plant in human history. Maybe not so much in this country per se, but going back into the 1800s, in I think it was 1893, the British government commissioned a study in India, a very well-known document that talked about the various cultural uses of cannabis and its minimal impact on what would be known as crime and criminal behavior. And there were no prohibitions or sanctions or problems in the eyes of the British government after this report, but was the first of many studies done by various levels of government on the benefits and or harms of cannabis. Now, when it became prohibited in Canada in 1923, in the United States in 1937, there really hadn't been any studies done outside of this one Indian Hemp Commission. And so after it became illegal in 1937, and really in some cases for the first time became a public issue, one of the first people that decided to study it, oh wait, no, I was going to say Schaefer, but that's wrong. The mayor of New York City, I haven't read this recently, so it's not coming to me. Oh wait, here it is right here, the LaGuardia Commission, that's right. The mayor of New York decided that he wanted to commission a study in the city to see what effects were occurring because of marijuana use, because he hadn't heard much about it at all. And when that study came out, it effectively declared cannabis to be a non-issue and recommended, against the prohibition of it, essentially. But that study and every other single one, essentially, that leads to benefits has been ignored. In the meantime, I believe the United States government has commissioned 13,000 studies proving various harms that could come from the use of cannabis. Now, these studies for the most part have been so poorly designed that they can't stand scrutiny in court in front of an expert witness. That being said, the National Institute of Drug Abuse in the United States loves to talk about this massive pile of studies that they've done that they claim to have proven any number of harms, such as the one study that they claim proves it causes brain damage. Well, upon further review, the particular study that they use to cite this harm there's a couple of studies. They either happen in petri dishes, where they'll put a little part of a brain essentially into a petri dish and then subject it to massive amounts of THC, not the whole plant, but a synthetic form of one of the cannabinoids. And essentially, I think almost any chemical can be made toxic if you put it in that kind of environment. And so they've proven that cannabis causes, in their eyes, permanent brain damage, because if you put a brain cell in a petri dish and loads of THC, the brain cell will die. Well, I think you can, again, just about do that with any drug, and the brain cell wouldn't survive. But the other studies that they've cited more often has been the brain damage caused to monkeys that have been exposed to cannabis use. They often forget to mention that this study that they've cited had gas masks on these monkeys for hours. Like, they were being deprived of oxygen and would have, again, with any combusted smoke, had brain damage, permanent brain damage after that many hours of just not having access to as much oxygen as they need. So, on one hand, we have even continual poorly designed studies where, in my opinion, the people putting money into them and the researchers themselves wanted to prove certain ideals before the research was even put together. In fact, they wouldn't have received that research if they weren't trying to prove harms, knowing that the studies are poorly designed. But that's the only way they'll get funded to do studies on cannabis, is if it's poorly designed and trying to prove a negative, not a positive. And so, there's not only a lot of studies on these various harms, but when you read literature about them, like I say, when it's been reviewed by peers, such as this document here, the Institute of Medicine in the United States put this out, essentially a bunch of doctors. The year was 1982, and while they said that there may be some harms that come from cannabis, they couldn't really seriously or document any serious harms that came from the use of it. But they tried to claim that the research still needed to be done. But I can assure you, for example, not a single study has proven, not a single study with good methodology has proven that cannabis causes cancer. Quite the opposite. I would tell you cannabis cures cancer, but I could get in trouble for that. So I would like to say it helps with cancer, and people have been cured of cancer using cannabis, but you need to be careful what you say. But certainly, when any numbers are looked at with research, I would suggest that it proves, if not cannabis being a preventative medicine for cancer, certainly for those that have it, studies document time and time again the benefits of using cancer. I mean cannabis if you have cancer. In fact, the first person in the United States to gain access to medical marijuana through their legal program, Robert Randall, wrote these 3 books on cannabis and treatment. One of them is strictly devoted to cannabis and cancer therapy. And so while a lot of research has gone to prove certain negatives of cannabis, the fact is the opposite is more often true. But unfortunately, the governments are still bent on proving the harms. The only Canadian study being funded right now by the federal government is essentially attempting to prove cannabis use amongst youth causes schizophrenia. And so despite the medical marijuana access program, there's no research being done on medical marijuana, no even surveys being sent with the pot from prairie plant systems to see what patients think about the product, or other information at all being collected about cannabis by the federal government. There's individuals that have done their own research, but certainly none of it's federally funded. I wanted to talk a bunch about cannabinoids too. I guess there's so many different kinds of research on cannabis. It's hard to know what to focus on. But in 1964, I think, THC was first discovered in a lab in Israel. Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, I think is how you say his name, has been instrumental in research in cannabis. He's been doing it now. Well, the discovery was published in '64, so you could assume he started working in the lab with this plant at least in the 1960s. So he's into 50 years now, and he's still working hard, like today, no doubt. He not only discovered THC in the first place, which is an amazing chemical, but the next progression for him was, okay, so I found the active ingredient. Turns out there's about 70 cannabinoids. THC is the most predominant in volume of those cannabinoids. But there's other terpenes, flavonoids, essential oils that appear in a cannabis plant that are critical to its benefits and impacts upon the body. And some cannabinoids like CBD, which is mentioned somewhere up there. CBD is a muscle relaxant, anti-inflammatory. Apparently it helps balance out some of the effects of THC, which is why synthetic THC can cause anxiety issues because it isn't balanced out with some of the other chemicals that are naturally occurring in the plant. And so, so some strains contain a lot of CBD. We refer to them as indica. They're kind of the muscle relaxant couch potato strains. Other strains contain less CBD, more of what we call CBN, which is a nervous stimulant. It's really good for a headstone, good painkiller, helps with your nervous system in various ways, but it's not as much of a muscle relaxant. We refer to the strains heavy in CBN as sativa strains, kind of the headstone varieties. Now each strain only contains 6 to 12 of that group of 70 different chemicals. And then the flavonoids and terpenes are different as well, which is why each strain has this unique combination of different chemicals. And we're like unique strains of human. And so sometimes that perfect match is found between the cannabinoid structures and available cannabinoids and a person. Moreover, when you mix 2 or 3 different kinds of herb together, you're increasing the trace, or the number of trace cannabinoids present in your body, which is really important, and I'll get to that in a minute here. Dr. Mechoulam finds THC. So the next progression for him is like, okay, I found the active agent. Now I need to see how it works in the body. Right? Obviously, it had an impact and on many different systems. And so he discovered receptors in our brain. Turns out we got them all over the place, and they've been identified in 2 categories as CB1 connectors and receptors. And essentially, some cannabinoids match the one receptor perfectly where others match the other receptor.